Lossless Scaling frame generation just landed on Android, and I've been testing it for 2 or 3 days now, and we need to talk about it. So if you've been following the Steam Deck or PC gaming space at all, you've probably heard of Lossless Scaling frame generation before. It's a tool that uses frame interpolation to essentially double or triple or even quadruple your frame rate. Think of it like what DLSS or FSR frame gen does, but it works on any game and any GPU. It's been huge on the Steam Deck because you can take a game running from 30 FPS and push it to 60, and there's a lot of examples where it works really well. Someone ported that to Android. It's called LSFG-Android, it's on GitHub, it's free, and it's very much early stages. I've been testing it on my Odin 3 in both Game Hub and Game Native, and I want to walk you through what it actually does, how it works, and what you can realistically expect from it right now. First, let me explain why this is actually harder to do on Android than it is on the Steam Deck, because it works in a very different way. On the Steam Deck, lossless scaling operates as a Vulkan layer. It sits directly inside the game's rendering pipeline and intercepts frames before they even hit your display. That's why it's clean, it's fast, the latency is pretty low. On Android, that's not possible. Android 12 and up blocks external code from loading into other apps' processes, and it's a security restriction and there's no way around it without root. So instead, what LSFG Android does is it uses something called media projection. It captures your screen like a screen recorder would, it runs frame generation on that captured footage, and then it composites the result in an overlay sitting on top of your game. And that's already a fundamentally different and much slower approach. According to the developer, that alone adds roughly 50 to 80 milliseconds of latency compared to the Steam Deck version. And that's just the overhead of the method itself before anything else goes wrong. And this also comes with another issue we're going to talk about in a bit. Now, I spent time going through different settings in both Game Hub and Game Native, trying different multipliers, different flow scale values, different games, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I could not find a single scenario where this made anything better. Here's what actually happens when you turn it on. The game's frame rate drops first. The app needs to capture your screen, process it, and generate the interpolated frames and push them back out through an overlay. So that whole pipeline costs a lot of performance. You're starting from a lower baseline than you'd have without this tool, and then it's doubling or tripling that lower number. In this example of The Witcher 3, you can see the frames reported by GameHub's performance stats on the right, and you can also see the frames reported by LSFG Android on the left. The ones reported by LSFG Android are much lower, and that's because they are. GameHub is not actually realizing that something else is running on top of it, and even though it shows 45 or 50 FPS, it doesn't feel more than 30 FPS. Even with the frame gen turned off but the program running, you're already bogging down the game and it runs worse. Now when you turn on the frame gen, the numbers on paper can look fine. If your game was running at 40 FPS, maybe it's now showing 80 in the corner, but 80 interpolated frames generated from 40 captured frames with 50 plus milliseconds of added latency does not feel like 80 FPS at all. It feels worse than the original 40. The input lag is also really bad. With FrameGen on PC or Steam Deck, you do get some latency, and that's always been a trade-off, but it is manageable. On Android right now, it's pretty heavy. And I'm not alone on this, the Reddit thread for this release is full of people running into the same issues. One comment described it as playing on bad internet, which is pretty accurate. Another person mentioned a ripple or smearing effect on moving objects, which matches what I saw too. And on top of all these issues, you have the standard issues that just come with lossless scaling frame gen. You have the warping, you have the character's head jumping around places, you have the UI flickering. This is especially noticeable in games with fast movement. There's also another big issue with this solution. It effectively makes your touchscreen inoperable. When you turn on the tool, you can forget about trying to access any top-down or side menus, and you can somewhat use the touchscreen, but not reliably. I had trouble even just starting a game using the touchscreen, and because the LSFG Android overlay sits on top of your screen, you're also getting a delay on touchscreen. Now, this tool actually has touch pass-through built in, but it just doesn't work great. The game kind of thinks you're touching the original display, not the projected one. It's so messy, it kind of makes my head hurt even trying to explain it. Real quick, if you guys are enjoying this video, consider leaving a like, and if you're into Steam, Steam Deck, Steam hardware, and handhelds content, consider subscribing to the channel. I also tested it in Tomb Raider and it's just straight up worse. There are moments where it really feels like 90 or even 120 FPS, and the Odin screen is 120Hz refresh rate, so I can really test that, but you need to be standing still to get these results. The moment I shut down LSFG-Android, it immediately runs better. Now, I tried testing games that run at least 35 to 40 FPS because on the deck these are the games that feel good when you enable lossless scaling FrameGen. But here you actually need games to run at 50 to 60 FPS because the tool drops them down to 30 and 40 FPS and then generates frame from that. So I can't really see a good use case for this. Even here with Dishonored 1, which runs above 100 FPS on the Odin 3. I thought maybe I can frame gen it to 120 and it will be good. It's not. It just makes things worse. Now, what can we actually do to fix this? A lot of the issues come from one core problem: the media projection capture method. It's the only option available to non-rooted Android apps, and it's inherently slow. If you could bypass that, I think you can get much better results. And the most promising path is to root your device. On a rooted device, you could install a Vulkan implicit layer directly into the system, the same way the Linux version works on the Steam Deck, and you can hook into the game's rendering pipeline properly instead of capturing the screen after the fact. Now, the GitHub README actually calls this out. A Magisk module doing exactly that would be the closest you would get to the Steam Deck experience on Android. It's not something that this project is building right now, but it is a real buildable thing. If you have a rooted Odin or any other Android handheld, that's the version worth waiting for. I currently don't feel the need to root my Odin, so I can't really show you any of that. Now, version 0.1.1 did add a root-based capture path using Lipsu, which is a step in that direction. It's not the full Vulkan layer approach yet, but it shows that developer is thinking about it. Now, there are other solutions, and one is the hardware angle. Newer Snapdragon chips, the 8 Gen 3 and the 8 Elite, have something built in called the Adreno Frame Motion Engine, or AFME. It's Qualcomm's own hardware-level frame generation API. Samsung's Game Booster already uses it on Galaxy devices, and I think Red Magic has something similar. The advantage there is that it doesn't need to go through a screen capture at all. It works closer to the actual CPU, which means much lower latency. If somebody built an Android Frame Gen 2 on top of AFME instead of media projection, I think the results would probably be night and day compared to what we have now. There's also a frame generation feature being developed inside Game Native as well, and I think it's taken from this LSFG-Android. It's integrated at the app level, and it is being made by the same dude who made the LSFG Decky plugin on Steam Deck. I think that still works with an overlay on top of the screen. However, it is integrated into the Game Native app, so you don't need to have two apps, which would probably work a little bit better. There's no concrete release date on that, but it is being worked on. So the short version, right now, the method this uses is the worst possible version of how FrameGen could work on Android, purely because of the platform limitations. The better versions, rooted Vulkan layers, AFME integration, or app-level implementation are all real possibilities, and they're just not here yet. So where does that leave us? I think LSFG-Android right now is impressive as proof of concept and pretty rough as something you would actually use day to day. The latency hit and the performance cost of media projection method make it hard to recommend for any real gaming session at this point. But this is version 0.1.1. It came out of nowhere, the developer is moving fast, and the community around it is already contributing fixes and improvements. This is the kind of project that could look completely different in 6 months, especially if a rooted Vulkan layer path gets built out of it, or if AFME-based alternatives start showing up. If you've got a rooted Android handheld, an Odin or AOIN Tor, anything running Snapdragon, this is worth keeping an eye on. Just don't expect it to transform your gaming setup today. I'll link the GitHub in the description, and there is a great tutorial in the app itself on how to get it set up, and there's a ton of YouTube videos about setting it up, so look those up if you want to test it yourself. You do need a copy of Lossless Scaling from Steam to use it, so factor that in if you're thinking about testing it yourself. That's gonna be it for this video. If you tried this on your device, let me know how it went for you. Drop a comment. I'm curious whether anyone's found a setup where it actually works well, especially if you're running root. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.